As you all know, there's been a lot of issues, a big mess at Barcelona. And today I decided to bring on Dan Hilton to give us some clarity and answer some questions that we've had ever since this whole mess started with Barcelona. First of all, Dan, thank you for joining for a second time here, VMFC. But my first question to you is, what has it been like covering Barcelona for these last couple of weeks? News breaks like every minute.
Yeah, it's interesting. So on the Barcelona podcast, myself and Francesc still plugging along at the YouTube channel as well, where there's special little different videos, different topics, more attuned to the video form, and then the blog articles as well. So basically, it comes into how we process that news and how we turn it around into content. As silly as that sounds, where there's so many times where I'll see a rumor and I'll go, is there enough in that where I believe it enough to make some kind of content out of it? And do I actually have time in my personal life to once again distract from anything else I'm doing to make some other content? But yeah, we've been doing a weekly pod where it seems like because of the news happening so quickly and so fast, we've had some longer shows, but and then the YouTube video, even per week, I kind of have to say, what's the biggest piece of news? So when Koeman was announced, that became the topic of conversation, even though with all the news going around on Messi. I know we're going to talk about all of this, but with all the different pieces of chaos, and you almost have to take in one piece at a time. But I think it's a lot easier as well when you try to consider what's sensible, what's realistic, and instead of just kind of going crazy on transfers and all these things, just kind of keep yourself grounded in, for all the people who work at the club, there's only so many cell phones, only so many hours in a day. So all the things you think are happening on the internet aren't happening at that fast of a pace. There's no way that Barcelona was on 200 different transfer calls all at the same time. So I would always say, take a breath, realize what is possible, and realize what's happening in the moment.
Well, that's good that you put some calm into this situation and that it's not as crazy as it may seem. But I mean, for you, it looks like you found a proper balance between trying to break the news and actually creating good quality content, which is good because nowadays everything's so clickbaity. People want to have the first opinion, and actually Nick Diaz says this all the time, that he waits for some time to pass so he can actually form an opinion. He doesn't want to be the first one. So it sounds like that's what you're doing, and that's great, man, because again, we're kind of going in that direction where people just want to break the news. So I apologize for having to address this, but this is one of the main reasons why I have you here. The 8-2 loss to Bayern Munich, now the European champions. Was that the turning point in this whole dilemma with Barcelona, with everything that has been going wrong for them in these last couple of years? Was that not so much the turning point, but the breaking point where people said, all right, this is it. Barcelona's a disaster. Or did this happen way before that and people just didn't notice it?
Well, the 8-2, I mean, that was a lifetime ago, right? It's ancient history, a lot since then. But it feels like that. But in truth, I think the last time I was on, we did how the Neymar transfer all the way back in the summer of 2017 was that first domino. And you've been seeing the dominoes fall over and over and again when the next season, the collapse against Roma in the Champions League, when Valverde it would have been reactionary at the time, but he probably should have been fired, even though he had the double that season. And then the next season, the collapse at Liverpool, and Bartomeu, the club president, has come out after the fact and said, I accept fault that we should have canned Valverde at that time, because then you look at the timeline after that Valverde isn't let go after Liverpool, and a new manager isn't brought in who has a summer to work through transfers. So now you're looking at January when a rushed move is made. Barcelona are top of the table and they let go of their manager. And I can tell you in the history of football that letting go of your manager when you're top of the table usually is not a good sign for a stable club. And then Keaton comes in. He never gets the locker room. He never gets the respect of anybody. And for somebody who said that they were going to play this 3-5-2, who was going to look for Cruyffian ideals, let the ball do the work instead of the players, well, he inherited a squad that was, as we talked about last time, a little bit too old, a little bit too long in the tooth, and unable to press and work hard the way that, again, you look at Bayern Munich, and it's looking in the mirror of a team that has done everything right, that has inserted young, cheap, quality players into their team like Alphonso Davies, and taking a guy who's an 18-year-old winger in the MLS. I mean, he was special. I got to see him at 16. He was special in the MLS, sure, but to have the foresight to then move him back to left back, where he has surely excelled in that role. And just to be able to build a program over a long time, and Bayern, as we know, also likes to take a few free transfers from the other German clubs. And it's a little different than in Spain, where it becomes a bidding war between Barca and Real Madrid in a way that Bayern Munich isn't really financially competing with players that dream their whole life of playing at Bayern, and Dortmund basically gets the second pick of that. So I think in terms of the Bayern Munich match itself, it was a culmination of all those things. So Quique Setien, how much blame do you put on him? Well, some, but I think the squad that he was inheriting was always going to have the structural issues on the field that they were going to have. That 4-2-3-1 for Bayern Munich, when I was doing the tactical preview, I could have told you exactly how that match was going to go. It just happened to be a little bit worse because not only did Barca lose the tactical battle, which, as I said, I thought it would be a 3-1, 4-1 win for Bayern Munich, and indeed it would have been, but I wasn't expecting for the third straight Champions League season Barca's core to mentally deteriorate in the way that they did in front of our eyes. I mean, that match was 4-1 or 4-2 rather. And then goals happened afterwards, of course, in quick succession. And that's all she wrote, because it's just a different mentality too. Barca have shown that the core of that squad, as I said, it's not Puyol, it's not these guys with this intense desire to always be not only focused, but to all winning in mind, and to not let the downs get them so down. And this team just seems to be one that are going against them, certain players on the team. And I don't think names need to be said, but if you watch, you see the body language, you know which players I'm talking about, the ones who deflate and have is getting themselves together to put on a winning product when their backs are against the wall, because they're always the favorites, but when they're the underdogs, usually doesn't work out. And Bayern Munich, their opposite mentality exists. And Hansi Flick, who also came in this season, just like Quique Setien, a little bit earlier, had a lot more time, but he's just done a terrific job. I mean, yes, he was with Love for so long with Germany and had all those good things going and had the players buy in, but that Bayern locker room is the same thing. Neuer, Muller, if you go in that locker room as a coach that's not proven, they're going to eat you alive. And yet Flick was said, you guys still rule the roost here, but just buy in, work hard in my system, and we're going to win. And then they won the treble. So it's a tale of the tape. I could have told you before that match what was going to happen. It just wound up being, yes, much more dastardly than you would expected the result to be. 8-2 is an ugly number. Well, the 8 is certainly ugly too, but 8's an ugly number. And so it basically, Culés and people around Barcelona knew that there was a big problems for years now. But now when you lose 8-2 on that stage, the rest of the world gets to say, hey, look, I noticed there was a problem at Barcelona. And now that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the global reaction to the issues that were already quite systemic.
Absolutely, man. I mean, that 8-2 scoreline. First of all, I do believe that, I don't want to say it was a fluke, but if they play 9 more times, it's definitely not going to happen. Bayern could probably win those 8 or 9 more times, but not 8-2, right? Bayern Munich was a better team, and they have been the better team, but it's too much. 8-2, way too much. And at the beginning of your answer, you mentioned the managers and how Ernesto Valverde was sacked in the middle of the season when he was at the top of the table. And then Quique Setien, he just never seemed to get the team on the same page. And now they bring in a club legend, Ronald Koeman, who was managing the Netherlands national team and was doing a very good job. And now he's brought on, and he said that this was his dream job. But I don't know if the writing is on the wall here. I don't know if this is just the Barcelona board bringing him to use him as a scapegoat if things don't go well next season. But I don't know what I saw the video that you made too about Ronald Koeman. Excellent video, by the way. And I don't know. I just want to get a little bit more of your thoughts on Ronald Koeman as a manager and Ronald Koeman as a person that can manage the egos in Barcelona's locker room.
Well, I think, as Total Soccer Show, one of my favorite podcasts, always says, things can be two things. And Ronald Koeman can both be a reaction from the board, a desperate act from the board to bring in a club legend to try to get an ounce of good PR for themselves, even though Bartomeu, the president, his time is done no matter what. So he pushed the elections up from June to March. And this reaction for a coach manager that the new president come July or June may not want. So this is a 2-year deal for Coleman. And the two things, I mean, is that one, it could be action and it could be a desperate move, but Coleman can also succeed. And I think what the conclusion I came to, having looked at his managerial career and the different tasks that he's undertaken, is that we actually have no idea, because he has succeeded at times and he has had unmitigated failures as well. And you look at the things that you know he's going to bring into the job, however, and I think why he might be the man for this moment with Barcelona in crisis. And it's not necessarily complete crisis. It's a particular kind of crisis. It's one where you have to do not a full rebuild, but you're trying to get older players out of your club. And there are a bunch of young players, whether Puig, Fati, Trincao, Pedri, that are prepared to take on more responsibility and take on more minutes. So there is a core almost not ready to take over, because it's going to be hard to replace some big legends like a Piqué and Alba and Suarez. And it's funny I said Piqué, because I think he'll be at the club next season. But when you look at some of the other ones that are being forced out and the turnover that's going to happen at Barca, Koeman, I think, is the right man for that job. He's been known to have a strong personality. Even one of his very first jobs, and we're talking 20 years ago, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, a young Zlatan Ibrahimovic at the early part of his career, even then he was still Zlatan. He thought he was the best player in the world at the time. And he was still just a teenager, in his early 20s. And Koeman said, I'm going to put you on the bench until you realize that, it's not all about you. He didn't realize that, but he did buy in, and he did wind up playing and doing well for Ajax. And I think Koeman can take a little bit of credit for helping start Zlatan, almost giving him even if he didn't take the lesson, giving him his first hard lesson in his career. And Koeman has not been afraid. Valencia, that was actually the kind of thing that doomed his time at Valencia, where he tries to upset the locker room and say, hey, these are the guys that haven't been doing well and haven't been winning the big one in those finals. And so there was a little bit of turnover there. And once he lost the locker room, though, it was over. So he did fine in that first season, but by October of the next year, it was already a full mutiny. And we saw things broke down. But then, on the other hand, at Southampton, he did really well in the Premier League. And he turned Virgil van Dijk. You wouldn't know his name if not for Ronald Koeman. Sadio Mane, you wouldn't know his name if it weren't for Ronald Koeman. And then he goes to the Netherlands. And I think it is a good sign to see that his most recent job was arguably his most successful one. You saw what he did in the UEFA Nations League against Germany, with both the comeback and then with a pretty defiant win. He also had a split with France and got the results he needed there. So getting as far as they did in UEFA Nations League and taking what is, I'd say, a very modern formation. And we're seeing, to speak about Koeman as the kind of the thought process there. When Setien came in, you thought he was going to play a certain way. He wound up not playing that way, but you had predictions of how he'd always wanted to play at Las Palmas and Real Betis. And Valverde the same way. You expected he would be pragmatic, and he was. For Koeman, for the first 12 or so years of his managerial career, he was, between 7 and 12 years, he was very, very tied to that 4-3-3. He wanted to play a 4-3-3. And then he started to vary it up a little bit. And manager does when they get experience. He adapted and learned how to figure out what an opponent is going to do. He did a better job with the scouting reports over time. And now you see that with the Netherlands, yes, it is a 4-2-3-1, but I wouldn't get tied down too much to assuming that that's going to be the formation he uses. I think it's the one that fits the personnel that Barca has the best. And I think moving forward to 4-2-3-1 is fine, but particularly in the way that world football works. We all know that football is cyclical too. When Spain were lighting up the World Cup, winning in 2010, and Barcelona were dominating the world, the 4-3-3 was all the rage. And then world football took the next 10 years to teach your goalkeepers and your defenders how to pass the ball. And then the reaction to that was Real Madrid winning all these Champions League in the middle of the decade and recently in a counterattacking style, where they're playing with a 4-4-2. And we saw that in like Conte, and you have these players that do really well there. And it seems like the next iteration of this is almost a mixture of, you can counterattack, sure, but this 4-2-3-1 we saw with Bayern Munich. If you have not only athletic players, but everybody knows how to pass the ball now. So Barca, you have to do one up. You've got to be the best at those things. You've got to be able to press. You've got to be tactically astute, and you've got to make sure that you can deliver those final balls. And I think Koeman is going to attempt to bring a system that he shows at the Netherlands can work. And if you almost inject that system into Barcelona, I'm not going to say that I'm positive about what's going to happen, because, again, it's proven that no club can go through the crisis that Barca has gone through off the field and expect really good results on it. But I certainly think that Kool-Aids might be treated to better football than they're expecting. And I think the expectations are very, very low. So that's going to be helpful here. But for Koeman, I'm going to try to be optimistic. But if things aren't going well, Alex, I can tell you that it's proven, it's on his track record that things may not go well. And he might lose this locker room very early. And those things could happen too. And it's almost 50-50 the way this is going to turn out.
And all of what you just said is what I've been hearing from other experts on this, and it kind of just sounds like the consensus opinion on Ronald Koeman. It's either going to be a good experience or it's going to be absolutely terrible. And I think that's a bit of the scary part, because you don't know what to expect. But then again, you said it best. The expectations are kind of low, so it is what it is. You kind of just go with the flow now. Now, speaking of Koeman, and one of the guys that he spoke to apparently and isn't buying in so much on this project, or I'm using the term project quite loosely, is Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi expressed that he no longer felt happy at the club. Probably hasn't been feeling very happy for the last couple of years. I think it's pretty obvious. And then apparently he had a conversation with the new manager, and he's like, I see myself more out than in the club. So what the hell's going to happen here? I mean, is Lionel Messi really on his way out of Barcelona? Is it really going to happen? Is it going to be like Tom Brady leaving the New England Patriots? What do you even make of this? Do you think Lionel Messi is actually going to leave the club?
Well, I think some of the things, and I think we spoke about this last time too, that you have to take into account before you even try to answer that question is one thing that Messi does not like. He's an introvert. That's why you see him never give an interview in English, where he doesn't feel confident enough with his English to even give that. As much as he is the most marketable player in all of football, can you imagine if he was someone like Cristiano Ronaldo that actually enjoyed the limelight? He's a guy that doesn't really like to be the center of attention as much as he is. And so we can have this big, huge argument about the personality that he is, where he does seem, if certain reports are correct, to be some kind of prima donna, somebody that rules the locker room with an iron fist, that only allows his friends to get what they want, that pushes Luis Suarez and Jordi Alba into the starting lineup, and make sure that he controls the club like we say LeBron James does for back when he was the quote unquote coach / GM / best player of the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? But I think the other part of that is that the more you see about Messi, the man, and again, we don't know what happens behind the scenes, but so much of him is in front of the camera, and we've watched him grow up and watch the person he is. And still, he's an introvert. He loves his family very much. He loves the city of Barcelona. He likes raising his kids there. There's all those factors. And I think that's the one thing too, that before I answer this question, is that I want to remind people to humanize these players, that Rakitic makes a lot of money and his family lives and enjoys, and he's raising his daughter in Barcelona, in the city. And so if you're making a lot of money and playing at your dream club, what is the incentive truly of leaving the club? If you're getting paid a lot of money and raising your family in Barcelona, especially, again, the older players get. If you're 21, 22 years old, 24 years old, it's a little easier to take on a new challenge somewhere else. But when you're in your early 30s, as these guys are, and established with their families, it's a lot tougher. So the reason Messi would leave, though, on the reverse side of it, that's almost the argument for part of the why he would stay. It seems like the reasons for him are less today as we speak. But the reasons why he would leave, again, is quite simple. Next season is looking to be a transition year, because the president is on the way out. There's little money to spend. A new manager is coming in who seems to have been given the authority to change things up, and elections are on the horizon. Those are all things of consternation that, once again, do not seem to paint to Messi, where years in the past he said, this experienced, good squad that can win the Champions League. And he goes to the Gamper Trophy, takes the mic and says those things 2 years ago, and you can believe him. But now, with all the chaos around the club, with the project in the, as you call it, the state that it's in, he's also 33. So from his perspective, trying to imagine a Champions League trophy at the end of this year is quite difficult. And he'll also be losing another year. And as we said, many of his best friends, I'm not sure if we're going to talk about Luis Suarez just yet, but he was certainly in the news quite recently about his future at the club. So many of his best friends are not even leaving the club, but they're being forced out in ways that Xavi and Iniesta weren't. So whether they leave the club or have to sit in the stands, it's in this uncomfortable situation for Messi to be in. And the other answer to that is that Francesc is much better, again, speaking about this than I, but the whole idea of, is one player the club? The answer has always been no at FC Barcelona. That's why Ronaldinho was let go in the way he was when Pep Guardiola was in charge. But Messi's the one who makes that question the hardest to answer, because you always thought that Messi was going to be able to leave on his terms. But this is a board that does not want the final black mark. It is going to wind up being a campaign and a tenure for Bartomeu that is not seen. Even though he won a Champions League in 2015, it's not going to be seen in a good light. He's going to be considered one of the bad presidents with Gasper and a bunch of others at FC Barcelona. But he does not want to be the manager that is always, the president rather, always to be remembered as the guy who not only let Messi leave, but Messi said, I hate this so much, let me go a year ahead of when I'm even supposed to go. So the kind of argument, though, is the finances for the club. And it's hard for people to see that the grass might be greener, because losing the best player, I mean, again, the Barcelona podcast here, so I think the best player of all time, at least what he was on the field. I don't care about a lot of trophies, let's put it that way. But that's an argument for a different time. But for Messi, I think him leaving the club now, it's difficult, because if the board says we don't want you to go, he's got a 700 million euro release clause, and he's due to have his contract up. He can leave for free next summer, June 2021. Now, the only clubs realistically in this global pandemic that can pay for him is Man City, PSG, or Inter Milan. But I think you could see him not even a 7 million euro rather. It's so many numbers, it's hard to get all that out. It would have to be, because of FFP and the global pandemic, a negotiated price. So we saw Cristiano Ronaldo go to Juventus for 100 million. So I think Messi, it's possible that Man City or PSG could swoop in for 120 million euro and be able to negotiate that price down to have Messi leave in that manner. And Barcelona would also, because I think people need to understand, it's not about the transfer fees that they're going to not be getting on these veterans. Like Rakitic might go for 4 to 10, somewhere in there, million euros. Vidal the same thing. So it's not about the transfer fee so much as it is getting these players annual wages off their books. That's the problem at Barcelona, not even the limited market that they might find for these players, but the fact that Rakitic, he's 6th on their squad list in wages. Messi makes more than the bottom half of this club, and he makes more than almost the entire club. 15 or 16 of all the other La Liga teams, not combined, but individually, Messi as one person makes those annual wages. So it would definitely free up the next board, and not even Koeman, but the next board, and particularly a future coach, to actually make good decisions with the money in a way that this board, and I talk about the post-Neymar era in Coutinho, in Griezmann, and sadly to a degree Dembele, even though I thought he was the right buy, he's been injured. But the way that money was allocated is going to be the black mark on this president. But if Messi leaves, then I don't even know what's even darker than black. I think obsidian, I'm not sure what that would be. It would be pretty negative.
Yeah, I don't think Bartomeu and the board would want that massive bruise on their resume as being the board that let Messi go, or that kind of forced Messi out with their actions. But I was actually going to ask you if hypothetically speaking, where Messi would play should he leave Barcelona, but I think you answered that pretty well. The only teams that can pay, Manchester City, PSG, and I actually heard something about PSG maybe not even being able to get any big players, any big signings this offseason. So who knows? But I heard something very interesting on the BR Football Ranks podcast, and it was regarding Inter Milan potentially negotiating something with Barcelona. And this was more of like a hypothetical deal, not so much a real thing or a rumor. This is just hypothetical. I'm going to tell you what it is, and then let me know what you think. You might have a good laugh. But they were saying that Inter can offer Lautaro Martinez and 100 million euros for Lionel Messi. Is that possible, or is that just a complete fantasy that this person, I completely forgot who it was, but do you think that's possible? Do you think that's a fantasy? What are your thoughts on that potential deal?
Well, I think if Messi wants to leave and there's very few clubs that can afford him, then you have to reckon that it's with the realm of possibility. So, again, back in 2017, we never thought a club could pay 220 million euros for one player. Mm-hmm. And that kind of money and that kind of infusion of cash into the market, I think it hurt football in insurmountable ways. But as far as Inter Milan now having some new investors and having some money to spend, the only downside I see is that Lautaro Martinez, he went from a player that Inter was saying we want 100 million euros for him. And I can't take the last few weeks to be indicative of the player because he has shown great tools. And I think for any number 9 in world football, you can poke holes because every number 9 in football is going to miss chances, is going to have some dud games. And Lautaro Martinez has not returned from the pandemic looking like a 100 million euro player. So I think his market value might be down a little bit, but I would also be afraid to tie a player to Messi leaving in that way, where I would say if that happened, I would do my best, I know, to frame it as the club had to move on. Messi was leaving. So Messi is going to Inter. And almost in a separate deal, Inter Milan has also given Barcelona 100 million euros, and Lautaro Martinez has also joined Barcelona. Because tying a young player, especially a young Argentine player, to the name of Messi as some kind of replacement is a death sentence for that young player's career. So I would try to avoid that. And again, I would say that this is really up to Messi, and unfortunately up to a board that he does not like. So is it possible? Yes. But I think all the other things you hear, and I think as crazy as it sounds, the other thing that is possible too is I know he wants to leave to win a Champions League, but if he said, I'm done with this whole thing, I've lost too much and I do want to go to Newell's Old Boys, like I always said, I think Barcelona would negotiate a way to get him off the books and he would go back to Argentina. And I think that is almost just as possible because again, you have to think about what Messi's been saying for 15 years. He's been saying for 15 years. I know we live in the US and I would love to see him in Major League Soccer. I'd love to see him up close and personal. And I bet in the Chinese Super League, they would love to see him there. And I know they've been doing different things they've been investing less recently, but I know we'd love to see him all over the world. But he's always said, I just want to go back and play for my hometown club. And he's been saying that for 15 years. So he might feel differently now. 8-2 is enough to shock the system. But I think it's a culmination of that decision-making through the years with a slight addendum of the negativity surrounding his career at the moment.
Just imagine Lionel Messi at Newell's Old Boys. My goodness, that would be incredible. I don't know how that deal would look like. Honestly, it would be. It would be just incredible to figure out how Newell's Old Boys would be able to pull that off. But I think it does help that that's Lionel Messi's club that he supports.
Well, I think Messi would wind up paying a fraction of his contract. That's what would happen. Yeah. Well, I think that's actually the opposite with Luis Suarez, where Luis Suarez, the club, he has one more year on his deal, and the club would want him to leave the club, and that means that they would want him to almost pay his way out to terminate his contract, or else Barcelona has to foot the bill for his wages for the year, or whatever they can negotiate with another club. But any other club that's smart is going to say, well, no, we're going to make you pay Barca as much of Suarez's wages and his contract as we possibly can to get him off your hands. And so the opposite, I think, for Messi, if he wanted to go to Newell's Old Boy and really wanted to leave that much, he would pay or foot the bill himself and negotiate himself down with the club. And the club would obviously take that deal from Messi of saying, okay, we don't have to pay you that much because you're willing to leave now for this amount. So I think it would be an entirely different system because Messi would be leaving on his own accord, as opposed to Suarez, Rakitic, Vidal, all these players still on the contract that are saying, well, actually, I like living in Barcelona and I don't want to leave. But the club are saying, well, now's the time, you got to go. But they can't really afford to send them out.
Yeah, and that's a great transition because I was just about to ask you about this big list of players that are on that transfer list that Barcelona wants to get rid of. The list is massive. It's in the double digits. I don't know exactly how many players it is, but it's a big list. Luis Suarez, Ivan Rakitic, Arturo Vidal, all those guys. But the players coming in, that list is short. So how's that going to work out? Are we going to see a lot of players actually leaving Barcelona? Or is this just, I don't want to say a stunt, but is this just like, I don't know, just a list made of wishful thinking for Barcelona to free up some wages?
Well, yeah, we go back to the idea of what is a realistic transfer window for Barcelona. And so that exodus that has 12 players on it, not all those players are going to be sold. And once again, I want to remind people in this pandemic, this window per se might be pushed off for business to January. And it would be odd because that January window would then be the final window of that board. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But the board can do whatever they want before they leave. But if they make a lot of deals that are going to try to set up the club for the next 2 to 5 years, And then this new board comes in and says, actually, we had players earmarked that we would rather or prefer to have in. And I think the long list of players to leave, that becomes a priority. That certainly is a priority. And we saw over the last few seasons that they weren't able to move players or unwilling to move players. And now they found themselves in this mess. But for me, I think to make it quite succinct here, I thought Luis Suarez would wind up staying just because I thought it'd be too difficult to have him leave. But if the club is going to be terminating his contract in the way that rumors today at least say that they will, then Luis Suarez is leaving. Rakitic, as I said, you take what you can for him, 4 to 10 million, somewhere in there. Hopefully he can head back to Sevilla where he wants to go. And same thing for Vidal, and get their wages, their annual wages, off the books. I think Rafinha will finally be sold. And I think Martin Braithwaite as well. You have so many wingers coming in that I think that is a position that is pretty much wrapped up. And if Messi and Griezmann, this is important too, to note who's coming in and where Koeman wants to play certain players. If Griezmann is a 9, or if Messi's playing as the false 9 with Griezmann even behind him, you might not necessarily need to replace a Martin Braithwaite with somebody off the bench like that. And you look at Ansu Fati, Trincao, Pedri, and I mean, cross my fingers and knock on as much wood as you can, but a healthy Ousmane Dembele. And now those forward options look much beefier than they did even 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago. So as I said, those are basically the 5 players that I could see, that being Braithwaite, Rakitic, Suarez, Vidal, and Rafinha, who certainly will be on their way out. And then you have another player in Todibo that if you can get 20, 25 million for Todibo, then I think Barca is going to take that deal. And if Eric Garcia is available for 10 to 15, if you can basically get a +5 or a +10, and it's not really a swap because Todibo is going somewhere else, but if you can basically swap those 2 players and get 10 million for Eric Garcia, who wants to return to Barcelona from Man City, then do the deal. It's a good spot. But if you can't get Man City to negotiate with Eric Garcia down, he's supposed to leave next summer on a free transfer, but I think you just can't take too many chances with that. You don't have the money and the time to worry about that, and you stick with Todibo. He's been good enough. So I think you'd see Juan Miranda, we're talking Oral Busquets, Mateus Fernandez, you're talking loans, or maybe you're talking buyback options. So there's a lot of other players even off the surface. And Frances is a big advocate of getting rid of Alba, but he's got unlike Suarez and Vidal and Rakitic, he has a bunch of years left. I think it's 3 or 3+1 or a 4 left on his contract. So he's a tough guy to get off the books. And PK, I think he's still going to be involved next year. Busquets is going to be still involved next year. So throw out some of those names and just understand that it may be 5, 6, 7, 8 deals around the peripherals. And then as far as bringing players in, again, they're bringing in Pedri, they're bringing in Trincao. Ricky Poo is going to have a larger role next year. Ansu Fati should have a larger role next year. Carlos Alenya should be back. Again, Todibo might be back. Ronald Araujo at center back is getting a full promotion as well. So I think as far as the margins of the squad is going to look a lot younger. And that's been the big problem. They've been too old, so they're getting younger. And are they unproven players? Sure. But I think going out and spending another 55 or 60 million, however much you can collect as hurriedly as they can, and then throwing it at another guy that's just not going to be worth what they're going to have to pay for him in a COVID market doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't think it's actually as doom and gloom in the transfer window as you think. But as well, as I said at the very start, my first answer, that on Twitter, everybody has 12, 13 names. They say, oh, it's got to be a complete overhaul, but that's not how it's going to work. Things have to make sense. Things have to be systematic in the way that players have their exodus.
Yeah, I mean, getting rid of 12 players in one window is very unrealistic. Now let's talk a little bit about the players that could be coming in, or some of the rumors that we've heard. One of them actually surprised me. One, because he was linked with the rival, with Real Madrid. And 2, it's in a position where maybe Barcelona doesn't need that many players. And I'm talking about Donny van de Beek. He's one of my favorite players, one of my favorite young players. Scratch that, one of my favorite players, just period. I love how he plays. He's so much fun to watch. He's so passionate when he plays. Do you think he will play for Barcelona, or do you think those rumors are true? Or is this, again, just all talk?
Yeah, well, let me answer your question by not answering your question at all, and instead talking about Felipe Coutinho, because I think the answer to Van de Beek, or again, any player that's going to be worth more than 40 million euros, is directly tied to Coutinho. And my sense is, and the feeling around Catalonia is that Ronald Koeman has told Felipe Coutinho, that he's going to be part of his squad next year. And that's almost out of necessity, because I think the board and the club did look around the market and say, hey, is there anybody in world football during this global pandemic when no one has any finances or nobody has any money to spend that's willing to spend $470 million on Coutinho so we can at least not completely embarrass ourselves and lose more than 100 million euros on this kind of transfer in 2 years? And it seems like the answer was a resounding no, which is unsurprising. So if Coutinho is a part of Barcelona's setup next year, I still don't think he fits with Messi and Griezmann. It boggles the mind. It's confusing to me. And I don't see how Van de Beek possibly comes in if Coutinho is part of that squad. Because, again, if Koeman, it also depends on how he wants to play. If Koeman's going to play that 4-2-3-1, I mean, I would love to see Ricky Puig as, not to say playing that Thomas Muller role, because they're entirely different players, certainly, but being the guy just underneath Messi and combining with him if Messi's in a false nine role. And then I could also see if you're going to push Puig back to the De Jong role. I mean, I think it would get complicated. Where you put Ricky Puig, I think, is important. I think he might fit better in a 4-3-3, but in that 4-2-3-1, I think he would fit better behind Griezmann or Messi if you have Messi out on the right wing, Griezmann up top as that number 9, and Puig right underneath him in behind with the wingers, and then the double pivot. So for Donny Van de Beek, I agree with you. I think he's a good player. I didn't think he was as good this year for Ajax of what I saw after De Jong and De Ligt. I mean, Ajax is a squad that's gutted every year, but they're saying 55 million euros for a 23-year-old, which is reasonable in a normal market, but not for a club like Barcelona with nothing to spend. And as you had said, prior to Koeman, Van de Beek was going to Real Madrid or Man U. There was never any question that he was coming to Barcelona. So if he was almost halfway out the door and Ajax are saying already at the start of the summer, hey, we're not selling him to Real Madrid or Man U, why would all of a sudden they pick up the phone and say, hey, Barcelona, oh, I'm glad you guys called. We'll definitely make a deal work. I just, again, it doesn't check out when you look at all that means. But if Van de Beek were to arrive, he can play in a double pivot. And as I said, he also, I think, would do really well as the middle of that 3 in a 4-2-3-1, which is where he plays in a national team. So I think I would still be excited about the transfer. But if you're going to talk about those Dutch rumors, unfortunately, Georgino Wijnaldum, who's going to be 30 this year, he may be a Champions League winning player, but I think he's a player that's much, much more likely because his contract is up next summer. So again, you want to say you dream of the good player or the big player, the big name, but then you look at what's actually possible, and it's the less inspiring name.
Yeah, well, good thing we put that rumor to bed, because I was going to get a little too excited if Van de Beek were to join Barcelona. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the presidential election. And this is something that's very important. I feel like sometimes people don't pay much attention to this, but they don't realize that those are the people that are making the decisions for the club that they watch and that they support. And there's this one name that has emerged as I would say the favorite to win the election in March, Victor Font. And he's promised a lot of bringing back legends like Xavi. He's promised a lot. You know, he's talked himself up to becoming the consensus favorite to win it. What do you know about Victor Font? What do you know about his experience in the sport, his identity with Barcelona? I mean, he has a pretty Catalonian name, but besides that, how does he identify with FC Barcelona? What is, how can I phrase this? Wow, my brain just shut down for like 5 seconds. Holy. Okay.
I think when talking about the presidential election, it's I think not only is it mind-boggling, but the explanation I think is necessary before we do anything else, I think, is to understand that unlike, and I know your listeners aren't necessarily FC Barcelona fans, but with the exception of Real Madrid, FC Barcelona, and I believe Athletic Club, they have elections. They have a president. Florentino Pérez isn't going to be at, or shouldn't be at Real Madrid, God willing, forever. And those have elected officials in ways that, especially in the Premier League, you're talking about these huge owners that come in and change the face of clubs. I mean, PSG, Man City, obviously the big ones that have ownership groups that it seems like they have a limitless amount of money. But FC Barcelona, it's a club with members and socios that pay dues. And so they don't just have this bottomless pit of financial resources. And so that's why Bartomeu has found himself in the kind of trouble that, let's say, the ownership group of PSG won't find themselves in. because PSG, there's no way to overextend themselves because, again, they're just going to be able to pay every fine. They're going to be able to basically get themselves out of financial ruin because they have this limited, again, I mean, it's basically a nation state that's funding PSG.
Mm-hmm.
And Barcelona and Real Madrid the same way. They're just not in that same position, but they're trying to compete with those numbers. As I said, with that Neymar transfer, the market is completely broken. So Barca and Real are trying to do the same. And I think Man United to even a similar degree where, yes, they have an ownership group, but it's in upheaval. And you see Tottenham, where if they have owners that don't want to, like a country wants to spend, then they're going to be in some financial trouble. And so Barcelona, that's why you're seeing this election where this board got themselves into financial. They made bad decisions over an amount of time. And even they, with the Espai Barca project, they tried to promise a little bit too much. Now, Victor Font, what makes him, I wouldn't say he's the favorite because I think there's still a bit of time. And the understanding I get, there was even a poll a few weeks ago in Catalonia that said if Juan Laporta were to run again, it seems like the biggest amount of socios would like to vote for him. And I think something that we also have to understand that if you're a Barca fan living basically anywhere but Catalonia, that you're different than the socios. Socios tend to skew a little bit older. They've been born and raised with the club. They've seen every iteration. They've seen bad presidents. They've seen good presidents. And again, they pay membership dues. So they want they want the club to be able to stand on good financial footing. And that's the oxymoron of Bartomeu's campaign. I think the biggest reason why it's going to be seen as a failure as well, because he was brought in as supposed to be a legacy candidate, if you will, for Sandro Rosell. And Bartomeu winds up being, basically a businessman 2.0. He wasn't necessarily a sporting figure, if you will, or somebody tied to football. And so being a businessman, you'd expect that, if anything, the socios were going to get a president that was going to take care of the finances. And so to see the mess that Bartomeu is going to lead the club in, again, another smear on his campaign, on his tenure as president of Barcelona. So I think just having all that as a base understanding, what Victor Font has done, he really has come in from nowhere as not much of a name. Again, he is a figure in, not really a figure in the city of Barcelona, but he is a Catalan man. And he does represent that Catalan identity in ways that socios do want to connect with. But he doesn't have the name recognition of a Juan Laporta. But he also is not related to Bartomeu, so there's a leg up for him there. Now, the things that he's promised, it's not just Xavi. And I think that's what he's trying to push back with his campaign, that he's trying to say that, yes, Xavi is the big point. That was the jumping on point. That's the headline catcher. That's the thing that's got him into the circle. And he's been campaigning now for 2-3 years just to let people know. And you've seen other candidates like Benedito try to have the motion of non-censure, where they try to the vote of no confidence, rather, if you will. I probably messed up the other pronunciation of that, but yeah, the vote of no confidence from Benedito. So he's going to throw his hat in the ring, and Laporta might be an option. Emile Rosard, it might be an option as well. So there's going to be a lot of candidates that are running campaigns, and Victor Font, it feels like he's out in the front because he's been planning, and I think has the most comprehensive plan of all of them so far. But I wouldn't necessarily say that he's the favorite, because we don't really know, especially in the English-speaking world, we don't really have our finger on the pulse of what the socios in Catalonia are thinking. And they are, by and large, the majority of the people that are going to be electing the new president. But I think what Victor Font is trying to do, where he's trying to combine this idea of taking the club back to its Catalan roots by trying to we saw that Puyol was with the club for a hot second there, then just said, no, I'm going to be I'm going to be an agent instead. So just his relationship with some of the legends, it seems like on paper, that's what he wants to go back to. But it's always going to be, when you see change at Barcelona for, I think, many, many decades in the future, every president, is going to say, remember how great things were with Pep Guardiola? I'm going to try to take the feeling around the club at that moment and all the good things that went into the club at that time, and glossing over all the negative things, because there were some bad moments too. But I'm going to take all those happy feelings you had about the Pep Guardiola era, and I'm going to return that to FC Barcelona. And I think that's basically what every candidate, I mean, this is like politics 101, right? This is like political science. That's what the candidates are trying to instill. They're trying to make you remember that feeling you had when things were good and make you believe that's going to happen again. So I think that's why Victor Font, he gets people to feel those warm and fuzzy feelings. And I am really interested to see how he basically takes the campaign that has existed online and how he when faced with the other candidates like Laporta with more name recognition who are popping up with their own promises, how he basically takes his very well drawn up plan for multiple years and how he contradicts that or contrasts that with what these other candidates are going to try to promise.
Those elections are always so interesting. For the presidential elections for Barcelona are always incredibly interesting. These are going to be in March 2021, right?
Correct. Well,
Okay.
That's when they're slated to happen, yes.
Yeah. I mean, they were supposed to happen, what, like 2 months ago? 3 months ago? Something like that?
Well, no, it was always scheduled for 2021.
Okay.
But the issue is that with the pandemic as well, and I think Bartomeu knows this, that if the stadium was open with fans, there would have been and he's had a bunch of vote of no confidences against him, as Laporta did as well. Every president will, because there's always an opposition to every president, regardless of how good of a job they're doing. But I think if there actually was a vote of no confidence at the stadium, this was that moment. This was that moment where if La Liga were to start in September, this would have been the time when I think you might have seen something happen. But because there's no fans to go vote at the stadium for a vote of no confidence, Bart basically knows that he's going to continue on to have the job. And he said himself that it's his responsibility to guide the club into what will be this new cycle. And he wants to be the person to hand it over in a good place. And he said that's his responsibility. And that's a politician's way of saying, hey, I'm in power, it's me, and I'm going to keep doing the job. There's not much you can do about it, but it's his responsibility. And that's the whole thing, right? That if he wants to make sure that nobody remembers him in a really bad light, that he's going to have to make sure that he leaves this club in the best possible shape that he can.
Politics and sports. One more before I let you go. I appreciate your time, Dan. Let's talk about the 2020-2021 season. Of course, you mentioned a little bit about the low expectations, the bar being set a little low, the players coming in, the players leaving, the new coach. What are your expectations for this new season coming up?
Yeah, it's almost impossible to think. Honestly, I have not, as much as I think for, 4 to 6 hours of every bit of my day are concentrated about the football club or thinking about the football club or thinking about content related to the football club. I really have not garnered to believe what expectations might be. I think the expectation is that they will not win the Champions League, but I tend to always be somebody hopeful where if Messi is refocused and you see a squad that has young legs with desire and hunger, and they're playing behind the best player in the world, still what I believe is the best player in the world, I don't think there's any reason not to think that Barcelona can do some winning. I think Real Madrid is better than they were last year, particularly the season the way they ended La Liga, and they've reinforced with younger players in a way that Barcelona should have for a long time. But yeah, I tend to be optimistic, but I think by October we're going to know if this has all gone sour with Koeman. And I think, as I said, my expectations are that Barcelona wind up not winning a single trophy. But if you tell me that they're going to win a double of the league and Copa del Rey, I would also not be too surprised. Because final reminder here about world football. If Barcelona starts, and I doubt they will, but if they were to start this La Liga season, which starts in 2 weeks, by winning 6 straight or 8 straight matches, and Real Madrid lose 2 of 6 or 2 of 8, and Barca already are 6 points up on the rivals in October, right? And then El Clasico comes in I don't remember when it is, October, November, and Barcelona beats Real Madrid 3-0. Which club is in crisis, right? I mean, it changes weekly. That's why when we talk about transfers and stuff too, and you mentioned Donny van de Beek, do you know what sells papers? A Dutch manager being linked to a major Dutch player at Ajax. That's what sells papers. So that's what I always try to think. Every bit of rumor, everything you see during transfer season, during the start of a new year, just always consider how many papers did this sell and how many people are actually saying this thing other than this 1 or 2 report from somebody's basement, right? And I think when it goes to the coming season, I try to keep a steer head. And when you think about Barcelona and do this every week and you're creating content and the way that we do, that you start to say that, okay, well, last week the roof was on fire, but this week Barcelona won 5-0 and everything is great and they look wonderful on the field, right? So are things different? Well, no, there's this underlying crisis that always existed over years now at Barcelona, and the club may be facing it now, but the on-field product, not that it's going to be fixed, but it could look good. And we just have to understand that it's possible. That could happen. That as gloom and doom as it sounds, I think there has to be some kind of positivity, because a club with as talented of players as Barcelona still have, I think it could be a good sign.
Well, I appreciate your way of looking at all of this. It's very refreshing. I got to tell you that. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for doing this, Dan. Go ahead. The floor is yours. Plug away your projects, whatever you're working on.
Yeah, so I would say that I would direct everybody to, there's a number of places to go. So as I always say at the end of basically every show, we have a podcast. It's called the Barcelona Podcast. Find that Apple, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And then there's the YouTube channel, the Barcelona Podcast. Again, the podcast's up there to listen to, but I also do a bunch of other different special video stuff. I do match reviews there as well, tactical breakdowns, all that stuff. We have a Patreon where I do quick take match reviews. That's a Patreon, same name, the Barcelona Podcast. We also have a closed Facebook group that people can join. There's a lot of discussion there. Twitter, Instagram, you know what it is. And then you can find me everywhere at HiltonD13, pretty much everywhere you would find me. So that's all the places we are that I remembered. Oh, and then our blog, barcablog.com. So if you want to find everything I just mentioned, just go to barcablog.com, front page. You can get all the links to all the different places I mentioned. So yeah, we are hard at work, Alex. And as much as the last season ended in a bitter way, last week, the new season starts in 2 weeks. So we are already gearing up for preseason content. So we're excited.
Yeah, it's definitely very strange and unique times, which is good in a way because, like, for example, we were all watching the Champions League final this weekend. But then the Community Shield between Arsenal and Liverpool is going to be played on Saturday. So it's just a quick turnaround where usually we get the Champions League final in May, and then in August you get all these Super Cups and whatever.
I also want to plug that Barcelona's Femení team still in the UEFA Women's Champions League. Now, by the time this goes out, they might have been eliminated by Wolfsburg. But if they did beat Wolfsburg, again, in the future, if they did beat Wolfsburg, and then they're probably staring down the barrel of Lyon once again. But they made the final last year of the UEFA Champions League. So when we do say that everything at Barcelona is gloom and doom, not true. The Barca Femení are probably the best iteration of them that have ever existed. And I just want to end this show by saying that I really hope that people start to pay more attention. And I'm glad to see there's more investments in women's soccer and women's football. And I'm excited to see that. And I hope that seeing it on CBS All Access, you can watch it in the same way you watch the Men's Champions League. And that's been a really good sign. So I want to continue to say, I hope that women's sports is continuing to push forward. And as I said, Alex, I couldn't leave the show by also saying that when you read about Dembele and Umtiti, I think you catch my drift. Be careful of what you read, because there's some bad actors out there. There's some bad journalists and people who have got the bad idea. So consider who you're talking about when you're talking about certain players and why they're being written at. And I always say Raheem Sterling. Think about how Raheem Sterling is written about and Harry Maguire is written about. And so I just want to end it there, that think about how women are reported on and how particularly players of color are reported on. So I would say that just make sure when you're reading through rumors, when you're on Twitter, that you're just seeing it with an objective way and that there is some malice behind, and not everyone hopes that our club wins.
And that goes for everything. You got to critically think before you start reading. Dan, thank you so much. Best of luck to you in this upcoming season.
Thanks, Alex.
I hope it's a good season for you guys, and I hope you create a lot of great content like you've been doing for a long time. All right. That's it from us. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.